8 years of silence ended with one phone call. Dean Martin answered, unaware 6 words would change everything. This story reveals pride, regret, and mercy behind Hollywood's smiles. Watch closely, subscribe, and share if emotional history matters to you and classic legends still inspire understanding today. Dean Martin had learned how to survive silence. For 8 long years, no calls came from Frank Sinatra, the brother he once trusted, laughed with, and fought beside under blinding stage lights. Hollywood kept smiling, but Dean felt hollow. Nights ended early. Jokes landed softer. Every song carried an echo of unfinished conversations, and every drink tasted like memory rather than celebration. The split with Frank was never official, never explained publicly, yet it followed Dean everywhere, a quiet shadow backstage. Friends avoided the subject. Reporters guessed wildly. Dean said nothing, mastering the art of pretending everything was fine. But time did not heal. It stretched the wound thinner, sharper. By the late years, illness slowed him, and reflection replaced bravado. He replayed moments, words unsaid, apologies delayed, pride chosen too often. He wondered if Frank ever missed him, or if the silence had become comfortable for both men. Then, one evening, the phone rang. The sound cut through the room, with unusual weight. Dean stared at it, heart pounding, unsure whether to answer, unsure whether the past should be disturbed. In that pause, 8 years collapsed into a single breath, and destiny waited on the other end, softly reminding him that forgiveness sometimes arrives when strength feels weakest alone. The call did not begin with music, jokes, or bravado. It began with breathing. Frank's voice sounded older, heavier, stripped of command. Years earlier, they ruled rooms together, teasing danger, daring crowds to keep up. Now, distance shaped every syllable. Frank spoke first, cautious, respectful, as if approaching a fragile relic. Dean listened, fingers trembling, absorbing the impossible truth that silence could end. Neither mentioned contracts, careers, or old disputes. They circled memories instead, laughing briefly about reckless nights, shared stages, and loyalty tested by fame. Yet beneath warmth lived regret. Frank admitted pride had blinded him. Dean admitted hurt had hardened him. The conversation moved slowly, like men crossing thin ice, careful not to break what little remained. Time felt suspended, balanced between past and finality. Dean understood this call was not about reunion or headlines. It was about release. Frank paused, then said 6 simple words, each carrying the weight of years lost and chances buried. Those words did not excuse everything. They did not erase pain. But they reached Dean in a place applause never touched. In that moment, forgiveness felt less like surrender and more like mercy offered to himself. When the call ended, the room seemed quieter, yet lighter, as if something heavy had finally been set down. Those 6 words were never quoted publicly, yet their effect echoed loudly. Dean did not repeat them to friends or reporters. He carried them privately, like a letter folded into his heart. In the following days, his mood softened. He smiled without forcing it. Music felt warmer. The bitterness that once sharpened his humor loosened its grip. He spoke more kindly about the past, no longer framing it as betrayal alone. For years, fans imagined rivalry, lawsuits, and egos beyond repair. The truth was simpler and sadder. 2 men too proud to speak first. Dean understood now how easily time becomes an accomplice to regret. Illness reminded him that tomorrow was never guaranteed, and reconciliation delayed can become reconciliation denied. Frank's call arrived just in time. It did not restore youth or rebuild partnership, but it restored dignity. Dean felt seen again, not as a punchline or supporting act, but as a brother. He returned to old recordings, hearing harmony where he once heard tension. The silence between notes mattered as much as the sound. Forgiveness changed the story he told himself about those 8 years. They were no longer wasted. They were the long road toward one honest moment. That realization brought peace deeper than fame ever could provide. Dean Martin never dramatized the ending. There was no public reunion, no staged photograph, no encore demanded. What mattered happened quietly, between breaths and memories. The phone call closed a chapter left painfully open for too long. When Dean spoke of Frank afterward, There was respect without edge, affection without defense. Listeners noticed the difference. His voice carried ease again. The man who once hid hurt behind charm allowed softness to surface. That change did not come from success, money, or applause. It came from resolution. The 6 words reminded Dean that being right was less important than being at peace. As his health declined, he faced the future lighter, unburdened by unfinished anger. Death no longer felt like interruption but completion. The silence that once punished him now felt earned, gentle, forgiving. In the end, the call did not destroy Dean. The years without it did. The moment it finally came, it saved what mattered most: his sense of brotherhood, his humanity, and his ability to let go. Some stories end with triumph. This one ended with truth, and that was enough. It offered a lesson about pride, timing, and courage that listeners still carry today, long after the music fades and the lights dim forever quietly inside hearts. When Dean Martin gently placed the receiver back, he did not move for a long time. The room felt unfamiliar, as if rearranged by unseen hands. He sat alone, listening to the quiet that followed forgiveness. For years, silence had been cruel, sharp, and accusing. Now it felt calm, almost respectful. Dean realized something had shifted inside him. The anger he carried like armor suddenly felt unnecessary, even heavy. He stood slowly, poured a drink out of habit, then set it aside untouched. His thoughts drifted backward, replaying moments he once avoided. He remembered laughter with Frank that felt effortless, jokes that needed no audience, loyalty that once seemed unbreakable. He also remembered the fracture, the stubbornness, the refusal to bend. For the first time, he did not assign blame. He accepted shared responsibility. That acceptance brought unexpected relief. The call did not erase the past, but it reframed it. Pain became context, not definition. Dean slept better that night than he had in years. In dreams, stages were smaller, crowds quieter, but connections deeper. He woke with clarity, aware that closure does not always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives through humility. That morning, Dean understood the call was a gift, not only from Frank, but from time itself. It had waited until he was finally ready to receive it without defense, without pride, and without fear of vulnerability. People around Dean noticed the shift before he spoke about it. His laughter came easier, not as performance, but as reflex. Conversations lingered longer, warmer, unguarded. Friends sensed a weight had lifted, though few knew why. Hollywood, a place trained to spot weakness, instead saw calm. Dean no longer reacted sharply to old questions or rumors. When Frank's name surfaced, there was no pause, no tightening of expression, only respect. This subtle change traveled quickly. Musicians, writers, and producers whispered that Dean seemed lighter, almost younger in spirit. Yet he never credited the call publicly. He did not need validation. The reconciliation was personal, sacred. Fame had taken enough from both men already. Dean protected what remained. He focused on moments rather than milestones, choosing peace over relevance. In private, he reflected on how easily pride disguises itself as strength. The industry rewarded toughness, silence, dominance. But none of those brought peace. Forgiveness did. Dean began reaching out to others he had lost touch with. Short calls, simple words, no grand speeches. Each conversation felt like clearing another stone from his chest. Hollywood taught him how to build walls. Frank's call taught him how to lower them. In doing so, Dean reclaimed something more valuable than legacy. He reclaimed connection, and with it, a gentler way to exist in a world that rarely slows down for regret. Frank Sinatra did not make the call lightly. For years, he carried his own version of the silence, loud with regret. Success surrounded him, yet something essential remained unresolved. Friends urged him to let it go, to accept distance as final. But Frank understood unfinished stories have consequences. Pride had once felt necessary, even righteous. Over time, it felt hollow. Watching age creep closer, he realized power could not outlast conscience. The decision to call Dean was an act of humility unfamiliar to a man known for control. Frank rehearsed the words repeatedly, fearing rejection more than embarrassment. When Dean answered, relief washed over him. followed by vulnerability. He did not ask for reunion or forgiveness outright. He offered honesty. The 6 words carried everything he could not say earlier. When the call ended, Frank felt exposed but free. He had finally spoken truth without performance. Though they would not rebuild what once was, he knew the silence no longer defined them. That knowledge softened him. Frank understood that reconciliation is not about restoring the past, but honoring it. In choosing to speak, he reclaimed integrity over dominance. The call did not fix everything, but it fixed what mattered. 2 men, once divided by pride, met again briefly in honesty. That was enough. For Frank, the silence ended not with victory, but with peace. The story of Dean Martin's final call is not about celebrity drama. It is about time, and how merciless it can be to unresolved pride. 8 years disappeared without mercy, fueled by ego, misunderstanding, and fear of vulnerability. When the call finally came, it exposed how unnecessary the distance had been. Dean understood that forgiveness delayed is forgiveness denied. He wished the call had come sooner, yet accepted its timing. Life rarely offers perfect moments. It offers real ones. The 6 words mattered because they arrived honestly, without defense. Dean carried that lesson quietly, sharing it only through changed behavior. He became more present, more patient, more forgiving with others and himself. The silence that once punished him transformed into reflection rather than resentment. His story reminds us that waiting to speak can cost more than speaking imperfectly. Pride builds walls quickly, but dismantles them slowly. Dean's peace came not from being understood by the world, but from understanding himself. That understanding softened the end of his journey. When his time finally came, he left without unfinished bitterness, without unanswered questions haunting his last thoughts. The call closed the book gently. It taught that courage is not always loud, and reconciliation does not need witnesses. Sometimes, it only needs one honest moment, one quiet voice, and the willingness to finally listen. After the call, memories returned with new clarity. Dean Martin found himself revisiting moments he once pushed aside, not with bitterness, but with understanding. He remembered early mornings, when fame felt distant and friendship felt permanent. He remembered sharing stages, where timing mattered more than ego, where trust made every performance effortless. Those memories no longer hurt. They instructed. Dean realized how easily success disguises fear, how often pride grows from insecurity rather than strength. The silence between him and Frank had never been about hatred. It had been about 2 men protecting themselves poorly. With age came perspective. Dean understood that unresolved conflict quietly reshapes identity. It hardens humor, narrows compassion, and turns reflection into defense. After the call, he allowed softness back into his thoughts. He spoke kindly of shared history, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Friends noticed he lingered longer over old songs, listening instead of judging. Each note felt like a conversation resumed rather than repeated. The past no longer demanded explanation. It offered meaning. Dean accepted that reconciliation does not rewrite history. It reframes it. In doing so, it frees the present. The call did not reopen wounds. It closed them carefully, respectfully. Memories that once haunted him now rested quietly, no longer asking to be corrected. They only asked to be remembered honestly. And for the first time, Dean was ready to do exactly that without fear. Dean often wondered why silence lasts longer than anger. Words spoken in haste can be forgiven, but words withheld become permanent. For 8 years, he carried sentences that never found air. Each one added weight. Each one became habit. The call exposed how unnecessary that burden had been. Frank's 6 words did not explain everything, yet they acknowledged responsibility. That acknowledgement mattered more than detail. Dean realized how often people wait for perfect phrasing instead of honest intent. In waiting, relationships erode quietly. The weight of unspoken words presses hardest in private moments, late at night, when distractions fade. Dean had lived there too long. After the call, he spoke more freely, not dramatically, but sincerely. He learned that vulnerability is not weakness when offered without demand. Hollywood rewarded performance, but life required presence. Dean chose presence. He no longer needed to win conversations. He needed to finish them. The lesson reshaped how he listened, how he apologized, how he forgave. Silence became choice, not punishment. That distinction mattered. Words, once withheld, finally felt safe to release. Dean accepted that clarity often arrives late, but it still arrives. When it does, refusing it only deepens regret. The call taught him that healing begins the moment truth is spoken, even imperfectly. And once spoken, it cannot be taken back, only carried forward with care. Dean and Frank never returned to what they were. They did not need to. Brotherhood evolved. It matured beyond shared stages and public triumphs into mutual acknowledgement. The call marked that transition. Dean understood that relationships are not static. They age as people do. Expecting the past to survive unchanged invites disappointment. Accepting growth invites peace. The bond they shared was no longer about proximity or partnership. It was about recognition. Each saw the other clearly, without myth. That clarity removed resentment. Dean stopped measuring loss by what might have been. He measured it by what remained. Respect remained. Affection remained. That was enough. He learned that reconciliation does not require constant contact. It requires honesty once. The absence of noise does not mean absence of care. Dean carried that lesson quietly, applying it elsewhere. He released expectations that drained energy. He valued simplicity. Brotherhood, he learned, is not proven by closeness alone, but by the courage to speak when silence harms more than truth. The call restored balance, not attachment. It allowed both men to move forward without dragging the past behind them. Dean no longer felt defined by separation. He felt completed by understanding. In redefining brotherhood, he discovered a gentler, more sustainable way to honor connection without clinging to what time had already transformed as time moved forward. Dean sensed an internal quiet he had not known before. It was not resignation. It was peace earned through honesty. The call did not change circumstances, but it changed meaning. Illness slowed his body, yet clarity strengthened his spirit. He faced reflection without avoidance. There were no unfinished arguments demanding attention, no anger waiting to resurface. That absence mattered. Dean understood that peace at the end of life is not granted automatically. It is prepared. The phone call became part of that preparation. It allowed him to let go without regret dominating his final chapter. He no longer rehearsed old conflicts in his mind. He focused on gratitude. Gratitude for music, laughter, mistakes, and the courage to finally listen. The silence around him felt earned rather than imposed. Dean accepted that endings are not about applause, but alignment. His inner world aligned at last. When he spoke, there was softness. When he listened, there was patience. The call gave him permission to rest emotionally, something fame never allowed. He carried that calm forward, knowing that unresolved pride is heavier than mortality itself. By choosing reconciliation, even late, Dean ensured that when the curtain eventually fell, it did so gently, without resistance, leaving behind a legacy defined not by conflict, but by growth, humility, and quiet understanding. Dean Martin's legacy was never only about music or laughter. It was also shaped by what he did not say for years. Silence, when prolonged, becomes a co-author of history. Fans remembered the separation, speculated endlessly, and filled gaps with assumptions. Dean understood this, but no longer felt the need to correct it. After the call, legacy felt less like a public record and more like a personal reckoning. He realized how easily pride had its memory, leaving out context and compassion. The silence between him and Frank had influenced how both men were perceived, turning complexity into conflict. Yet the final call softened that narrative internally, even if the public never fully knew. Dean accepted that legacies are incomplete by design. They cannot capture private healing. What mattered was not how history judged the silence, but how he carried it. He chose not to let it harden him further. Instead, he allowed it to teach restraint, patience, and humility. The call reminded him that legacy is shaped most powerfully by final choices. Ending with grace does not erase earlier mistakes, but it reframes them. Dean no longer measured success by applause or remembrance. He measured it by alignment between who he was and who he became. Silence had once defined loss. Now it defined reflection. That shift changed everything about how he viewed his own life, and how gently he allowed it to conclude. Fame had given Dean Martin everything except closure. Applause drowned discomfort. Laughter disguised hurt. Success offered distraction, not resolution. For years, he accepted that trade. The call forced a reckoning. Dean realized how often fame rewards avoidance. Busy schedules excuse silence. Headlines replace conversations. Pride hides behind public image. Yet none of it resolves personal truth. Closure cannot be outsourced. It must be faced. Frank's 6 words pierced through the noise fame created, reaching the private space where unresolved emotion lived. Dean understood then that closure is not dramatic. It does not arrive with witnesses. It arrives quietly, asking only honesty. That honesty stripped fame of its authority over his emotions. He no longer needed validation from crowds to feel complete. The call made him feel seen without performance. That feeling lingered. Dean shifted his priorities subtly, valuing authenticity over recognition. He spoke less, listened more, and let go of narratives he once defended. Fame remained, but it no longer dictated his inner life. Closure reclaimed that territory. The contrast was undeniable. Fame had amplified distance. Closure reduced it. Dean accepted that no amount of success compensates for unresolved relationships. In choosing closure, even late, he chose freedom from a cycle that fame alone could never break. Dean often reflected on what 8 years cost him. Time lost cannot be refunded. Conversations delayed rarely return unchanged. The call highlighted this truth painfully. He wondered how many moments could have been different if pride had softened sooner. Waiting felt safer then. It avoided vulnerability. But safety came at a price. Distance grew comfortable. Misunderstanding hardened into identity. The cost of waiting was emotional erosion, gradual and quiet. Dean understood that silence convinces people they are protecting themselves, when they are often isolating themselves instead. The call exposed how fragile that protection was. One honest moment dismantled years of guarded distance. Dean accepted responsibility for his part. He did not romanticize the wait. He learned from it. The lesson stayed with him. Timing matters, but courage matters more. Waiting for perfect circumstances often means missing real ones. Dean carried this understanding into other relationships, choosing honesty earlier, even when uncomfortable. He no longer delayed difficult conversations. The cost of waiting had been too high once already. The call saved him from repeating that pattern. It taught him that reconciliation delayed is reconciliation endangered. That knowledge became part of his quiet wisdom, shared not through speeches, but through changed behavior and intentional presence in every remaining interaction. As Dean's journey neared its end, there was no dramatic reconciliation tour, no public declarations. There was only clarity. The call had done its work. His heart felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing essential remained unspoken. Dean faced the future without resistance. He accepted mortality without fear amplified by regret. That acceptance mattered. He understood that endings reflect how we lived, not what we achieved. By choosing honesty when it finally mattered, he chose peace over pride. The silence that once punished him now felt deserved, even gentle. He rested within it rather than fighting it. Those closest to him sensed the change, though few knew its source. Dean did not explain. He did not need to. Peace explains itself. When reflection came, it was kind, not accusatory. He allowed himself forgiveness alongside offering it. The call became less about Frank and more about self-reconciliation. In that way, it transformed everything. Dean's story did not end with noise or spectacle. It ended with understanding. And that understanding allowed him to step away from the world, not as a man defined by conflict, but as one defined by growth, humility, and the courage to finally let go. Dean Martin's final lesson was not about fame, talent, or rivalry, but about courage practiced quietly. He learned that pride often disguises fear, and silence often pretends to be strength. The phone call revealed how fragile those defenses truly were. One honest exchange dismantled years of emotional distance, built carefully, stubbornly, and unnecessarily. Dean understood that forgiveness is not forgetting, and reconciliation is not erasing harm. It is choosing not to carry weight that no longer serves the soul. This lesson reshaped how he viewed conflict itself. Arguments were no longer battles to win, but opportunities to restore balance. Dean realized that reconciliation does not require agreement on every detail, only acknowledgement of shared humanity. The call taught him that timing is cruel, yet truth remains generous when finally spoken. He wished the lesson had arrived sooner, but accepted that understanding often follows endurance. From that point forward, Dean treated relationships as living things requiring attention, not trophies to defend. He listened more carefully, responded more gently, and allowed imperfection without judgment. The silence that once punished him became proof of growth rather than loss. In the end, the lesson was simple but demanding. Speak before pride speaks for you. Forgive before time decides for you. And never assume tomorrow will offer another chance to heal. Stories often search for villains, but this one resists that temptation. Neither Dean nor Frank was entirely right or wrong. They were human, shaped by ambition, loyalty, insecurity, and expectation. Dean accepted this complexity after the call. He stopped simplifying the past to protect his pride. Instead, he allowed nuance to exist without defense. That shift changed how he understood responsibility. He realized that blame shared is not blame avoided. It is accountability accepted honestly. The silence between them had grown from mutual fear of vulnerability, not absence of care. Understanding this dissolved resentment. Dean no longer needed justification for forgiveness. He needed only clarity. The call provided that clarity without spectacle. It confirmed that reconciliation does not require rewriting history, only acknowledging it fully. Dean embraced that truth. He allowed himself empathy for Frank without diminishing his own pain. This balance mattered. It prevented bitterness from disguising itself as self-respect. Dean learned that maturity often arrives when certainty leaves. Relationships, like people, rarely fit simple narratives. Accepting complexity allowed him to release the need for resolution that favored one side. Instead, he chose understanding that honored both. That choice freed him from carrying a story built on opposition. The past became shared ground rather than contested territory, and peace finally had space to settle. Dean Martin's story endures because it mirrors a universal truth. Many lives are shaped more by what is delayed than what is done. Silence feels safe, yet it accumulates cost quietly. Dean's 8 years demonstrated that unresolved distance reshapes identity over time. The call interrupted that trajectory just in time. It reminded him that reconciliation is an act of courage available only to the living. This awareness sharpened his sense of urgency. He became intentional with words, knowing they carry consequences whether spoken or withheld. Dean no longer postponed honesty in the hope discomfort would fade. He understood it rarely does. His experience became a private compass guiding future choices. Though he never lectured others, his behavior taught clearly. He valued repair over performance, substance over image. The lesson transcended celebrity. It applied to friendships, families, and quiet relationships unseen by crowds. Dean recognized that pride thrives in delay, while healing thrives in immediacy. Choosing to speak early does not guarantee harmony, but choosing silence guarantees distance. The call taught him that courage is not loud confrontation, but timely truth. This understanding followed him through his remaining days, shaping how he loved, listened, and let go. His story endures not as gossip, but as guidance for anyone standing at the edge of an unsent message that in the end, the phone call mattered not because of fame attached to it, but because it arrived honestly. Dean Martin did not seek redemption in public memory. He sought peace within himself. The 6 words offered by Frank did not rewrite history, but they softened its sharpest edges. Dean accepted them without negotiation. That acceptance completed something unfinished for years. His life, once divided by unresolved pride, felt whole again. The silence that followed was no longer hostile. It was calm, earned, and meaningful. Dean understood that closure rarely announces itself. It settles quietly when truth is allowed to land. The call became a reminder that reconciliation does not require perfect timing, only willingness. Dean carried that knowledge forward gently, without preaching. His final chapter was defined not by conflict, but by clarity. He left behind a lesson carved from experience rather than theory. Speak when it matters. Listen when it is difficult. Forgive before time removes the opportunity. Dean's story closes not with spectacle, but with understanding, reminding us that the bravest moments often happen privately, between two voices, before silence returns transformed. This truth lingers beyond celebrity, urging ordinary people to choose courage early, speak honestly, and refuse letting pride steal years that can never be reclaimed. Some calls come too late, some just in time. Dean Martin's story reminds us, speak sooner, forgive faster, and never let silence write endings you still have power to change.